everyone, it's Dr. Rick, and today's interview is going to be really good. So today I'm interviewing Patti Lorenzo, who is an LCPC, and we'll define that in a second. And I've always talked how mindfulness is important to understand and practice or intertwine into a healthy lifestyle. But it is a tough sell. So Patti, what is the definition for people who don't understand what an LCPC is?
Short for Licensed Clinical Professional Counselor. So I am not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist technically, but we pretty much do the same thing, except for some limitations on my end.
Thanks, Patti. So where is your practice now?
I practice out of two offices, out of Oak Brook and Schaumburg, but most of the time I do telehealth. Given the current circumstances, a lot of people prefer to do therapy from the safety of their own homes.
When I last touched base with my psychologist, we were face-to-face, but she does offer telehealth. And I thought it was, for me, I thought it was perfect. But I can see how some patients or potential patients and clients might be apprehensive. Can you get the same benefit in telehealth that you do when you're face-to-face?
Personally, I like in-person because, there's like such a thing as body language and energy levels. You can sense it more in person. But given our limitations these days, I think telehealth has been working pretty well. It takes some getting used to. But it's all about, establishing that rapport and just being open to that adjustment.
So the platform is important. Obviously, we have to have some kind of template for people to understand how to get in and get improvement in their lifestyle. People will look on their insurance card and they'll see some verbiage. And then I always find that on the back of the insurance card, it's another totally different aspect where they put behavioral health. Do you know why behavioral health is separated from regular?
Personally, I think we've come a long way in terms of behavioral health and the openness to it, but I think we still have a way to go in terms of integrating physiological stuff with behavioral health. And I think the difficulty comes from behavioral health being a little less visual or tangible. Not everybody thinks of it as a brain function and that a brain is an organ just like your heart or your pancreas or something like that. But I think we're getting there little by little.
That's a good point because in the 80s it was in vogue for people in California to have a shrink. And unfortunately, I think that term is pejorative. It really shouldn't be calling a psychiatrist shrinks, but it at least put a noose on the relationship that those folks that have millions of dollars, supposedly in Hollywood, would use to get into better health.
Right.
But as you and I both understand, it is really intertwined. And in Asian or Eastern philosophy, it's always, in Ayurveda, in traditional Chinese medicine, there's always part and parcel of the whole person or whole system being mental health.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, here there's a schism that it's considered separate, and insurance really separates it.
Yes.
In fact, that's, as I alluded to earlier, the frustration is I know my counselor, and I know my specialists, I know my surgeons, I know my physical therapists, my nutritionists, so I can tell a patient, go see Sandy, go see Dr. Chadia. But when it comes to behavioral health, it's almost like I'm off the cliff because I have to say, call your 800 number, and it already sets up for a disconnect.
Yes, there's a time factor as well, where you want this person to get immediate help, and it's like they have to wait months, they have to wait weeks to get an appointment with a therapist or even a psychiatrist.
And what I've found as a primary care doctor is I sometimes, especially if it's severe, I tell them you have to go to the emergency room because that's a fast track to get a second opinion or at least get an evaluation. Suicidal is obviously a severe presentation of depression. Yes. So for anybody that's watching, if you do feel that you're suicidal or you have thoughts, ideas, or plans for it, you really should hang up the phone and head over to the emergency room. There's no problems with the emergency room. Everybody's taking COVID precautions, but it will get you a faster answer. And if you can get a faster connect, you should be able to get into the system. With Western medicine, it's separate, but at the same time, most of my integrative colleagues will know it's very important. In some cases, for sustainable change, especially healthy lifestyle, nutrition is a concept that people understand because they go to their kitchen and they watch Dr. Oz.
Right.
Activity is a concept because they can remember in their youth they used to do things. Sleep, people poo-poo, but we can talk about that later. But mindfulness, I think that it's so difficult to grasp that it's really intertwined. Why would you say it's so difficult for the average American or the average person living in America to entertain going to behavioral health?
Because it comes from the value systems where, is there something wrong with me, or do I have to admit to it? And it's, a lot of people say pride, but I think a lot of it has a lot to do with shame or approval, getting approval from other people. And we're always afraid to show people our vulnerabilities and the sites where we make mistakes, where we fail. We don't have a very good idea or good perception of what failure and imperfection is. And I think it comes from that. And it takes when I see clients for the first time, it's always like, I always say thank you for coming and thank you for trusting, because it's all about trusting other people with your own weaknesses. And that's hard. It's hard for a lot of people, I think. I mean, I still struggle with it.
And we discussed before we started filming how I left 2 months ago. I left Advocate 2 months ago, cut and dry, which was very sudden and abrupt. And with that, it's a lifestyle change.
Right.
And I'm still going through it, but trying to find my way. However, I guess it was nice that I preloaded my mindful practice and my spirituality before I went through this change.
Right.
I cannot imagine, especially with COVID and unemployment, how people that don't have a foothold, a strong anchoring in behavioral health or spirituality or mindfulness, how they're going through this.
Right.
And then to put on top of that a lot of people are losing their insurance or health insurance, or potentially could lose their insurance. We talked on mindfulness and belief systems. What exactly, if you can break it down, I'm not sure if there's an easy definition for that or an easy way to explain it.
We'll try.
What is mindfulness?
When clients come in and they ask me, how do I usually do the sessions and all that, but I always say I tend to go towards mindfulness a lot. And it's almost like they grip their seats and say, I'm not going to sit 20 minutes in meditation. And I kind of explain it to them where mindfulness is something you can incorporate into what you're already doing. It's just kind of a shift in the way you see things and being more deliberate and being more intentional. For example, when you get up in the morning, you get up, go straight to the bathroom. It's like, suppose you paid attention and noticed what happens between the time you wake up, take your first breath, notice your breath and slow down a little. And they're like, well, yeah, I think I can do that. And then, subsequent sessions becomes better. Many times they come back and say, I never really did that before. And it's all about trying new things, I think. I feel like when I suggest mindfulness, I start in very small steps. And it becomes almost natural, I think, for some people, because they get that reward where they feel better. The day starts better, then they start making better choices. And then we go into, like I mentioned earlier, just accepting where you are and, being open to it.
You had so many bullet points I have to touch on there. So the small steps and the reward. So for those of you who know about dopamine, and this links us to relating it to how this organ up here really works.
Yes.
It's not just to think and process and fight or flight, but it tangibly develops these neural tracks of behavior that we learn, that we incorporate into a belief system, and it serves us, it's supposed to serve us for 80 to 100 years.
Yes.
But if it serves us in the wrong way, so The dopamine pathway, or the dopamine, is a hormone. The hormone is released from the brain mostly and the gut, but it's released to get the human to do that thing again. It's like a reward hormone. And usually you'll get it when you make it to the top of 14,000 feet, or you win the lottery, or you accomplish a task, or you fall in love. There's a dopamine hit, it's high and then it's low. And the theory from neuroscientists is that if the brain experiences a dopamine hit, it makes you want to go back and do it again, and it starts to hardwire that action that you just did, whether it's thinking and relating it to grabbing the end of the seat or staying away from dark alleys, and it makes you remember that, so it's put into a reflex. And when it's a reflex, it's effortless. But the problem is, I think that you might agree that because the successes are becoming very limited now, people will seek out dopamine in other ways, and happiness in other ways, like food. So, which is rewarding to a sense, but with the wrong kinds of food, it can be bad. And just using food as your reward all the time is not healthy either.
The neurotransmitters are produced in the gut, and you have to watch what you eat. So it's like this whole cycle of making a choice and being mindful of what you're eating. And when you eat something that's immediately rewarding, but it isn't really good for you, it sets you up to get into this cycle of, then you feel bad and you feel guilty, going back to the guilt, you feel guilty, and then you just go back to it. So at some point, that mindfulness factor comes in where you say you got to break these patterns, make that choice and acknowledge that it's difficult, but just one shift. I've also been reading a lot about the brain plasticity and all that, and you kind of change one habit and it kind of starts rewarding you in certain ways, and you go a different direction. So I think I like how you really touched on that.
This has to be an anchored idea of this mindfulness, and breaking it down into small steps does make it very user-friendly.
Yes.
And I like the idea about just walking from bed to bathroom or bed to toothbrush and being mindful about that. Using mindfulness in eating is a great idea. I find myself going to food, especially when I'm bored, or I'm filling out applications to hospitals or insurance companies. And it's like, oh, this is so boring. What am I going to do? Take a break. Oh, let's go to the cupboard. Which is such a bad idea. I've tried to, every time I say during the day between meals that I have to go to the cupboard, I'll try to beeline to outside because I have a lot of chores I have to do or small projects. So I usually will divert that way, but I don't know what my average patient is doing because it's so mindless and effortless to go to the cupboard or the fridge or the bowl, the Halloween leftovers, the bowl. So do you have a mindful practice that you might suggest to your clients and patients, like that small task that you told me about, going from bed to bathroom? Is there something that somebody might be able to realize and or stop themselves cold with regards to opening the cupboard?
First of all, I always say there's something you do that's pretty automatic that if you stop doing, you'll probably die. It's breathing. So, wake up in the morning, the first thing you do is you probably yawn or you probably take a deep breath. And I say, just be more deliberate about it and kind of notice how that breath feels. Take it. It doesn't take a long time. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 breaths. Just notice your first breath, your first 3 breaths. And if you feel as if you want to sit longer, then even better. But, just getting into the habit of breathing deeper. You'll notice that I notice sometimes I inhale, I don't exhale. So it's like, then you start noticing these things and you notice what's connected to these behaviors. So very simple things like that, and noticing discomfort, like you said, you're typing in applications and stuff, and I think self-compassion is a very, very important component of mindfulness as well, because you get into yourself and you become comfortable with the discomforts. Because, like you said, you get into a very it's a comfort zone that it's kind of paradoxical, comfort zone to just go through the motions because it's effortless, but we start wondering, why am I not fulfilled, or why do I not feel healthy? So that's when you start noticing things, I think.
Sometimes people need that permission to turn the camera or
Yes.
the questionnaire on themselves.
Exactly.
But you alluded to that also, which is we probably should open that can of worms up. Turning the camera on yourself, I think just for you guys, before we started filming, I asked Patti her best side.
Right. This side, so I'm going to stay.
There you go.
Stay looking this way.
But then I said, I don't have a best side, so I just give up. And I'm okay with it. But it's I guess it can be painful to
Yes.
look in the mirror and say, I have faults, I have imperfections. I guess people can do that on their own or initiate that on their own, but the ramifications could be damaging even further if you don't do it with a professional like yourself.
Right.
So so people trying to find their way would do better with you acting as their coach to guide them through. I guess alluding to that map, not only for guys, but for women, for kids, for our geriatrics. If we have a coach, personally, I think if you have a coach or a professional that's gone through this for years after years, it would be a lot faster to achieve perfection, I guess. Well, that's a bad word. We don't have to be perfect. When people are apprehensive on turning the camera on themselves, how do you propose to them, or how do you sell them that idea that that's part of therapy? Because if I had to go to a trainer and the trainer said, you're going to hurt, it's like, what? I don't want that. But I guess if the trainer said, you are also going to be long-lived and stronger than before. How do you, I hate to say sell, but how do you give that to a patient to say, this will really be beneficial?
I think you used a very, very powerful word earlier. You used the word permission. And it all goes back to, I like to tie things together all the time. It goes back to the value system and the stuff we learned growing up. Most of us learn to wait for somebody else's permission because of our parents. It's like that natural flow of things. We get to that point where we're adults and we no longer need that permission, and we're still working towards that. And in fact, I had a client the other day and I said, you don't really need to explain anything to anyone because this is you, you're feeling it. And she said, that is so helpful, just knowing that. Thank you. And I think that's when, that turning point happens, that tipping point where you kind of release yourself and say, wait a minute, this is about, me making that choice and making that decision. And now it's all about what's good for me. And again, going into that, I could go into that off tangent, but, it's about, shifting that thought where I'm not being selfish. When I think about me, I'm just taking care of myself. So it's a very difficult shift to make, but once you've made it, I think that makes a whole lot of difference.
So going back to traditional raising of kids, I think that male or female, we're taught to fit into a cookie cutter because it's probably an easy way for a parent to say, you have to do this. I remember my mom and dad, you have to stand up when people come to the table, you have to open a door for women, you have to always excuse yourself, pray before you eat. And I see where it's difficult to break out of that rut. Maybe not a rut, but break out of that mindset. But if we can show people, if we can give them the keys to at least take the first step out of the mindset, they should be able to feel relief. How would you say that spirituality ties in with behavioral health? Because that is a rigid mindset.
Yes.
And I found that in the population that I see, it's either people are deeply embedded in their spirituality and they don't want to change anything because it's against the religious sect.
Right.
Or people are not spiritually engaged and they don't want to go because they've had a bad experience with somebody trying to sell them a religion.
Right.
So how does spirituality work into mindfulness or behavioral health? If you can put that into one sentence.
I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. So I think that's a very important concept to think about, separating what spirituality is and what religion is. And, there could be so many interpretations to that statement.
I guess to put it into what I see in the clinic, if I have somebody that has a deeply embedded spiritual practice, I will embrace that.
Right.
If I see that some people have a hesitation to go down that avenue, I will remember that and put a note on it, just because I think that there might have been some trauma in the past.
Exactly.
That maybe pushed them away. But I do believe that going back to where we first began this, I think that it's an important thing to have as far as things to fix in somebody's life to get them to 100 years of age without hitting too many speed bumps. Patti, do you have a spiritual practice? I know from our relationship before that you were an artist.
Yes.
Is there something that you do on a regular basis, spiritual-wise or mindfulness-wise?
Spiritual-wise, of course, I grew up Catholic, so I still do my prayers the first thing in the morning, last thing at night. But I like to journal each day. Yesterday, to share a little, yesterday I think I woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and for some reason my mood wasn't the best. But I think just having that practice that you can predict and look forward to every day, it literally shifted my mood because I saw all my thoughts on paper. I'm a very visual person, maybe with my art background, so I tend to use visuals a lot. So it's all about accepting what you're writing, and I don't edit, I don't do anything. So that's part of my spiritual practice, I guess.
Very nice.
Push a lot of self-care on clients.
Which is what I think we have to do.
Yes.
We have to empower them to make changes initially together, but in the end on their own.
Exactly.
I think I'm always available for what I call warriors because they've made great strides.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I anticipate that the warriors will be back every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
But also, unfortunately, the majority of people haven't become warriors yet. So
Exactly.
there is some hand-holding. Going back to the way you said you grew up,
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're going to talk to our Filipino counterparts, behavioral health is a tough sell, very tough sell. So I have definitely a large Filipino contingency as far as a patient panel, and I haven't found a good way to sell it. Is there something that you can give to at least my patients to reassure them that behavioral health is not pointing the finger and it's actually very valuable? Is there something you can give us, enlightenment?
First of all, I always say we don't bite. And secondly, it's, first of all, the confidentiality stuff. We always go through that first session. And then you will not be judged. This is a safe place for you to be able to say what you want without filtering. And I kind of compare, what a therapist does and what your barkada, your group, your friend group does. You usually go to friends. You say, I don't need to see a therapist. I'm going to pray. I'm going to see my friends. I'm going to talk to family. Family's always there. But yes, that's true. I totally agree with that. But it's different when you go to a therapist's office where, even the stuff you think about inwards when you're talking to family, sometimes they don't really get it with all the best intentions. But when you see a therapist, you can even talk about family. Not that I'm encouraging chismes or anything, but it's a very safe place to be vulnerable, I think, and be open and kind of challenge. Therapists will always challenge your thoughts and your self-limiting beliefs, and that's when you kind of open up to change, and you start to practice. I usually like to say, just practice, do something different each day and see what happens. And most of the time, I can't say I can think of a time it didn't work. Most of the time, new things come up. You may open a can of worms, but that's not always a bad thing. So, and I think many of us, maybe other cultures are the same, but I noticed with us Filipinos, it's like let's not talk about it because the elephant in the room can stay where that elephant is, and let's just accept each other.
I have found that in small families, if I see everybody, they'll sometimes I'll just unload on everybody, and then there's nothing else.
Exactly.
Or the feedback is supportive but not constructive.
Right.
So belief systems when we're growing up are probably, if everybody is brought up in a well-devised household without any speed bumps, then perfect. But I think as we age, the decades, there's always going to be challenges to the individual and to the families, stressors. Nobody's perfect, and that's okay. But I think that once the guard is let down, if you can get through that point in time, because it is painful,
Right.
then there's a lot of potential for growing. And
Exactly.
if we use our family, I think it's valuable. I think there's a lot of strength in that. But again, because of all your training, I think that you will be a guide to really speed up the success.
Yeah.
What I see could be a problem if patients and clients are resistant on coming in and they're just going to embrace the family, is if somebody in the family is contorted or might give a wrong map for that person to follow. It might end up to the point of emergency room or hospitalization. Do you have a specific clientele that you cater to, or is it open to anyone?
I see mostly older adolescents, maybe from 16 years old up, and then adults, up to older adults.
If someone has a psychiatrist that they're seeing, and nothing against my psychiatrist, but when I hear that somebody's seeing a psychiatrist but they're not seeing anybody else,
Right.
as far as counseling, psychologist, LCPC, social worker, am I wrong in that assumption that really they should have an MD, but they also should have somebody as far as grassroots changes too?
You're absolutely right, because personally, in my personal belief system, it's when you take medication, it's usually a safety concern. When you go to the ER, they give you medication, and they want to regulate your mood, or they want to get you out of that headspace where you're suicidal. Then it's very necessary. But I believe that it's gold standard to have medication and your therapist. So you're able to kind of I like to work with a psychiatrist and kind of discuss where the patient is at, and to see if they're getting better, then maybe drop down, start replacing pills with skills. And again, it's about what's real for each individual. It's about what works for each individual. Some individuals come in and say, I'm super depressed, but I really don't want to take medication. There's no way on earth you can convince them. But you try different strategies. That's where the creativity comes in, and you kind of say, well, you go through the safety protocols and say, can you keep yourself safe? Then okay, let's work on something that's more long term. It's really up to the patient in the end.
Pills with skills. I went to steal that phrase. Pills with skills.
I must have stolen that somewhere else.
Well, we'll keep on stealing it, but that is fantastic. I think that my average patient really, that's the average American though, we're overloaded with pills. I'm not talking about vitamins, I'm talking about prescriptions. There's no problems with taking prescription medicine. I think it is for most people, it should be a temporizing measure until they develop the skills.
Right.
Whether the skill set is mindful practice, behavioral therapy, eating differently than before, activities that you never thought of, or sleeping and embracing sleep,
Right.
those skills sometimes have to be learned.
Yes.
And if you're trying to learn it on your own, you'll probably get there, but you might be frustrated too, and you might stop investing in the change. But if you get to me or Patti, I think we can get you there faster. So Patti, I really appreciate the information. I think that you've opened up and made this very non-threatening as far as behavioral health.
I hope so. Yeah.
I can feel it already, because the way you explained it is so effortless. But then if you have an average patient that has to turn the card around and say behavioral health, I think it's already threatening, but when patients see that there's great value in what you can offer, I think there's investment. So I appreciate what you have done today, and hopefully we'll be able to change the community. If people wanted to find you, how can they find you?
So you can find me on Psychology Today, and it's very easy to Google my name and find me. So it's just Patti B. Lorenzo, LCPC.
And I'm going to put that down below, and a link to Psychology Today. Psychology Today is a great resource for finding folks. And I think it also, on Psychology Today, once you put your zip code in, it has a list of people that populate, therapists that populate, doctors that populate, but it also gives a little bit of a bio.
If there's something you need in particular, there's like a list of specialties, anything from depression and anxiety to adjustment disorders, aging, and all of the above.
And I'm assuming, like myself, that you will take certain insurances or self-pay. Is that right?
Yes.
Patti, thank you very much for coming in today. I really, this was very enlightening, and I hope that we can change a couple folks, the ones that are on the fence. Definitely, if you have any problems or you're really feeling down, just go call your primary care doctor or head on over to the emergency room. There's no threat with that. But if you're doing okay but need to improve, I think no matter what, whether it goes back to nutrition, activity, weight, relationship to food, your relationship in the house, if you've lost your job because of COVID, if you're recovering from COVID, I think that we have a lot to offer, and I like what you can give to the patients I send you.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're just feeling in general something's off, we'll figure it out. Come in.